Welcome back to another episode of the Equipping ELLs podcast. I'm your host, Beth Vaucher, and I am thrilled to share with you our guest today, Kelly Reider. She is a leader in multilingual education with over 30 years of experience in public schools and educator training. Now, throughout her career, Kelly has served as an ESL district coordinator, school administrator, instructional specialist, and teacher. She's an expert in language development, curriculum design, and program planning at both the classroom and system level. I think you can see how much she has to offer us on today's episode, and it goes beyond that. She holds a master's in instructional systems development, is a national board certified teacher, and has certifications in elementary ed, Spanish, ESOL, and school admin, plus a TESOL ELT leadership certificate. Wow, Kelly, you have kept yourself busy.
You get a lot done in 32 years.
I love it. So I think everybody can already tell how much you're going to have to bring to the table today, and we're excited. Kelly has trained educators worldwide as a former WIDA certified facilitator and international presenter. Today, she continues to empower educators through her work at English Learner Portal, providing coaching, professional development, and tools to support English proficiency growth for multilingual students. Kelly, welcome to the show. I am so thrilled you're here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to talk to other educators focused on our English learners, multilingual learners. So happy to be here.
Yes, we were just sharing before we hit record of the beauty of this community and how collaborative it is. And, we all are really just wanting to play our part to help these multilingual learners have success in our schools. And so
absolutely,
it's a joy to get to be here with you. Now, today's episode, I shared more about you, but I want to hit a little bit on what we're going to be talking about today is functional language planning. I know that when it comes to planning lessons, especially when it's content, those higher level language learners, it can get really complicated and it can feel really overwhelming for teachers. Even if they've had training, even if they have the theory, it's still in the day-to-day practice can feel very overwhelming to break these things down and to know you're giving your students the support they need. And so this is a topic that I know many of my listeners are asking questions about, they want to learn more about. And so I'm excited to have you on and share about functional language planning. Now, let's dive in right into that. So can you explain what functional language planning is and how it supports multilingual learners?
Sure. And just to give a tiny bit of backstory, my dive into functional language planning came about towards the end of my public school career. So for years and years, you learn all kinds of strategies and tricks and go to professional development and work with wonderful people, and you find things that work. And then I moved into a new role as a district coordinator, where it was one of those things that happens to a lot of us where you're hired for what you know, but then when you start, you don't have the trust yet. So you have to figure out how'd that happen. And so building back up to that and being charged with writing curriculum for the district and what should we do for interventions, and trying to take everything that works and being questioned about, well, how do you know and what's the research, sent me on this deep dive into justifying what I knew to be true and right in my experience and what I saw with others. And so that journey led me through a lot of different places, but the ultimate place that helped me the most was, as you said, becoming that WIDA facilitator. I was then connected with that WIDA research community, which was such an incredible benefit. And through working in that, was introduced to Dr. Ruslana Westerland and others who are experts beyond writing standards and systemic functional linguistics. And in the beginning, it was like, whoop. And so the past couple years have been really trying to work through all that and boil through all of it. And finally came to the point where I was having the same conversations with teachers and school administrators, district administrators, everywhere I went, everyone I talked to, struggling with the same things, and just said, okay, it's time to put this together in a way that won't take someone 5 years to figure it out, because it can go a little crazy in depth. And language is huge. So where do you even start? So taking that journey into being able to boil down functional language planning. So I guess the best way to summarize it is that it's a methodology, right? An approach to planning for language development instruction. And functional language planning is based on the research and practices of systemic functional linguistics. And it's a huge field with tons of research to sort through. And with the mindset of a mindset shift to sociolinguistics over what we traditionally have done, which is more of a psycholinguistic switch. So just getting that, the brain research part of it, and why I love this approach, more or less that boils down to say that instead of taking a scope and sequence of first we learn this, then we learn this, then we teach this, and then in year 2 we cover these grammar points. Instead of taking a prescribed approach, functional language planning takes a functional approach, which is what language do we need today, this week, in this unit for our students to be successful and learn what they need to learn and be able to communicate about what they learned. And this approach was just like a sigh of relief to me, because for so long, the content areas have been changing curriculum. I know when I was the district coordinator, we changed language arts curriculum 3 times in my 7 years there.
Wow.
Which seems excessive, but I know it's not completely unusual that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Everybody's implementing new curriculum. And every time we had to recreate everything to support it and go with it. And it just didn't make sense to me. So then when I was challenged to start thinking about it from a functional language perspective, it made a lot more sense that you can be so much more flexible. And if the district or school makes a total 180 shift, then functional language planning can easily slide along with it without starting all over again.
Well, first, I want to thank you for taking the time to go deeper on this research, because, I think a lot of us as teachers, we see things that's working. We know what works, what doesn't. But to back that a lot of times is what the districts want. And it's hard to convey that when you start to go down the weed and all of this different research. You start to tear that apart a little bit, and you're like, this is this is a lot of time that most teachers don't have. And so I love that you have been led on that journey for so many others to be able to take from that and really kind of break that down into a much simpler format, knowing that this is, really what's best for students. Because we get that question all the time as well of, well, what's our scope and sequence? Can you just tell us what this is this? And who are your students? Who is in front of you? Because that's going to make a big difference of what you're going to choose to teach them. And, that's what I always answer people want, because they wanted just tell me what to do and then I'll do it. But it takes that functional planning piece.
It is, because we have the beauty of our student group, and the challenge of our student group is there is such a wide range of background, of literacy levels, of English proficiency levels, of native language proficiency. There's just such a huge range that trying to write curriculum that aligned with what the content teacher was doing, that worked for all the grade levels. And even in one district, I know this is true for everybody, the school on Main Street is so different from the school on 2nd Avenue. And trying to write for just 2 schools within the same district. And so it takes a lot of pressure off of that idea of really super structured curriculum writing into flexibility and freedom, which sometimes scares administrators when you say it's really flexible, it's kind of flows, and they're like, that doesn't sound very research-based to me. But it really is, because as you get familiar with it, there is structure to it. There's absolutely structure to it, but it's much more responsive and flexible than our traditional approaches that we've been taking over the years. And the challenge for me was understanding what the research is saying, but then trying to make it practical for
Mm.
every day in the classroom. Like there was a big gap of information there
Yep.
of, I get that, but
But what?
that look like here, and how do you do that? And how do you do
Yeah.
that without getting a doctorate in SFL,
Yes.
and so that's really been our work especially for the past year, is trying to bridge that gap between what we know to be true in research and then how to make it possible to do this without, like you said, sending everyone, on a research quest.
Yeah.
So.
No, and I love that. And I think that that is the biggest need that, I keep seeing over and over. I even just saw it on LinkedIn this week when they released some new, I don't know if it's a can-do descriptors or a new way of looking at, the can-dos. And people say, well, this is really nice, but what does this look like? This is still very generic, speaking that it's for someone in the classroom. This isn't something they can look at and say, oh, okay, I understand what this means. And I think that this practice, what you all are doing, is really, really powerful to empowering that teacher, whether it's a ESL specialist, whether it's a homeroom teacher, but for them to be able to see that, there is power in simplifying and pulling back and really being present to see the students that are in front of them and having that flexibility to guide them and to bring in the supports instead of having something that's trying to, fit and make them fit into this. That's not how language learning works. So let's dive into functional language planning. You said there is a structure to it. Why don't you walk us through, just the principles and what that looks like?
Sure. So when you think about functional language planning, the principles behind it. And I love this question because it really helps me to stay focused on the big pieces and the main ideas. So there are 5 big ideas that we base everything on. The first one is that language is functional, which makes the functional language planning is exactly that. And what we mean by that is that not just in the classroom, but all day, every day in our lives, that language is used to do things and accomplish things. So we have to have language for everything. And so taking that to the classroom perspective, right, we're not teaching language for the sake of knowing how to conjugate a verb to different tenses, right? We're approaching language as there's something I need to do with language today. And so what do I need to be able to do that? Comes down to being able to receive information from content and from peers and experts, and then also being able then to communicate our own thoughts and feelings and show what we know, which has been a big missing piece of trying to figure out how to get our language learners to be able to show what they know about what they're learning. So sticking to that, what do we need to do and what language is attached to that is the functional part. The second one is that the language choices we make or the language we need is driven by context. And that's a big mindset shift from psycholinguistics, scope and sequence of the past to SFL, is that we're not driven by a sequence of grammar rules. We're driven by the context that we're learning, which makes this fit so much better in a world where there's much less pull out and a lot less push in, co-teach.
Yeah.
And so you can teach language in any context. I can teach language in PE. I can teach language in science class or math or whatever language arts curriculum we switch to in next year or whatever happens, I can still teach language in that context because I know what to look for. And so we really focus more on what students need to be able to do in what they're learning, wherever they are, whatever we decide to focus on. The other piece is that language is so broad and huge, it overwhelms people to say, especially content teachers. And I find this, I did take a look at the new WIDA tools that were put out. I can't remember the exact name, some kind of guide, something chart, something. And they are much more user-friendly than past documents, which I liked, but they still assume a certain amount of background knowledge, right? So tools for the ELD teacher, but the content teacher is still going to struggle with, I'm all on board for being a part of this and supporting it if I only knew what it was, right? Okay, language, that could be anything. It's just like narrow it down for me. And so SFL breaks it down into what they call 3 meta functions, right? So we look at representing your ideas, right? Language is used for representing your ideas. Language is used for interpersonal communication, and language is used for putting your ideas into text and organizing in a coherent way. So pretty much being able to say what you know, communicate with others, receive information, and then in the end put it into context, put it into print. And the bigger mindset shift, as I said, is the principle that grammar is a part of it. So one pushback I hear is, well, I am a strong believer in teaching grammar. Students need to know grammar. They need to know. And that is absolutely part of functional language planning. It's just not the spotlight.
Standalone,
Right. It's the
embedded.
Embedded behind the scenes. So grammar is a resource for making meaning and putting your thoughts and ideas together, but not taught in isolation. So sure, you could have, if we're writing a narrative and it's something that happened in the past, we definitely need to teach about past tense and how we, make past tense verbs. And so you can do a little mini lesson that's grammar instruction on how the ED works and the irregular verbs, things like that, but only when there's a reason for it and a context for it, so the students have something for it to stick to.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the biggest one that is the first step that I usually take with schools is that the language develops from explicit instruction and use being the big one, right? We have traditionally done a lot of language instruction, but not necessarily encouraged the students to then use it in meaningful ways.
Absolutely.
So that's that functional part of, now that I taught you that little grammar bit, what are we going to do with it to make sure it sticks with you? So that's kind of a wrap up of the beliefs or the foundation of where functional language planning comes from. And it's a little bit of a mind shift, but once you get used to it, it's much easier and it makes more sense.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm like, this makes complete sense. This is what I've seen as well, of standalone grammar. I mean, even in our own experiences, like how many times, as a native English speaker, there's things I learned in grammar class that I could not recall at all unless I go back and review it. And oh yeah, that's what that means. It's just learning with, where it just kind of slips out of our mind, or are we connecting it to something? And I think all students benefit from that, but even more with our multilingual learners is to give them opportunities to build that schema, to make those connections. That's the way that they're going to learn. And I agree too with that application piece. I encourage teachers, just videotape yourself, see how much you're talking compared to your students talking.
Absolutely. Right.
Because unfortunately, language is something, if you do not use it, you lose it. And that's been, I took 20 years of Spanish, live in a Spanish speaking country. And when I moved down here, I had to actually learn how to speak it because I could conjugate the verbs. I could do it all in my head, but never had to really communicate. And I thought, that's part of my story of why I'm so passionate about this, because that was my story of, I have taken years of this. How can I not communicate? But if we're not constantly giving our students that time to put into practice, whether it's orally, whether it's written, and apply that vocabulary, the sentence structures, all the content they're learning, it won't stick. So I love that.
Right. And that's the comparison I always make, which what we psycholinguistics lines up really well with like world language classes and things. So
Mhm.
same thing. I took Spanish from sixth grade through my second year of college. And when I was hired in an elementary school, they're like, great, you speak Spanish. And I was,
Yeah.
yeah. And they're like, all right, you're going to push into kindergarten. And I didn't know how to say any kindergarten things. I had the same language level that they had in English, I had in Spanish. And so it's that whole idea of all that learning. I did a lot of learning,
Yeah.
but it didn't really serve me until I got into a situation where it was functional language. Now I need to learn how to say, tie your shoe, get your jacket,
Mm. And it had
go to the
purpose.
nurse, share
Yeah.
with others, all those kindergarten things. So that's a great way to paint the picture of the differences between the two, because a lot of people have experienced that first
Yeah.
version of language learning. And I think when we start working with content teachers, it takes a lot of pressure off into them remembering days of grammar. And,
Hmm.
as an English speaker, I learned about grammar by taking Spanish. I
Yep, me
didn't
too. I didn't know
remember
there's
any of
subjunctive in
that.
English until I learned
Right.
Spanish.
And in order to be able to think about it in English, I still go back to like, what would that be in Spanish? And then come back.
Hmm.
So we're going to try to avoid all those in between steps for our
Yeah.
students. And I think it's a lot easier for content teachers to feel much more non-threatening to see language in that way. You do know this, in a new curriculum, we're all learning it, of course, but once you know your curriculum and you know your standards, you know what students need to be able to do.
Yeah.
And the next step is just to really stop and think about what language does that take and not assume that they have it. And once
Mm.
we kind of get into that way of thinking, then I see, content teachers, really roll with it pretty quickly,
Yeah.
because it's not anything on top of what you're doing. It's
Right.
finding the pieces in what you're already doing and just making sure you bring those to the front for those
Mm.
who need it. And,
Mm.
it's not a whole different set of lesson plans. It's
Exactly.
not, adding more to your
Yeah.
plate. It's just where to shift the spotlight at different times. And where we normally start is just getting teachers, like you said, into that habit of planning for time for use of language, monitoring your student talk time,
Yeah.
planning for opportunities for peer-to-peer interaction. We have jam-packed curriculum
Yeah.
and a timeline that
That goes faster than even
faster than
the
native
most
English speakers.
experienced native speaker could go.
And so how to make those opportunities and make sure
Mhm.
those opportunities are happening. And then once teachers agree to try that and we help find those opportunities of where we
Yeah.
could make it happen, then they quickly see how different their day is, because there's much less reteaching,
Mm.
right? They teach each other better than we teach them a lot of times.
So true.
So giving them the opportunities, providing the opportunities, step one. And
Okay.
then the more you can, practice looking for that language, more natural it will become for you.
Yeah, and I think too, I've noticed, when I give my students more of that talk time, as a teacher, I feel so much more empowered to know what they need, where they,
Mhm.
might need a reteach, where they might need a mini lesson from me, but really just watching them interact is such a powerful way to see how you can better support students. But we got to give them that opportunity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let them do some of the work, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Give yourself a break.
And it can lighten the load a little bit. So let's talk about, the first step. So you kind of shared that a little bit of just, first looking at use. I know whether it's content teachers who are listening or maybe an ESL specialist that pushes in. I know that's a big area where, like you've
Mhm.
mentioned, we're doing a lot more co-teaching, maybe without the time it takes to actually plan. But I know
A
that's a
lot of that,
frustration
a
for a
lot
lot
of
of
it.
of teachers who this is kind of being placed on them, and, they're still feeling like they're not sure how this looks. So I feel like for those teachers who are doing a co-teaching and pushing into the classroom, how can they use some of these frameworks to really kind of be able to come in, observe, and where would you say to start with that?
I think it's very true that we've moved much more into a push-in co-teach world. And there are a lot of good reasons for that, but I think we've missed a couple steps in most places where that takes some figuring out. Any kind of partnership, any kind of relationship, that's like, dating your coworkers. How do they communicate? How do they want to handle conflict? How do they want to work together? How do they like their schedule? There's a lot to that we tend to skip over and just push people in. And there's intimidation, right? It's the content teacher feeling intimidated by, now I have to do language too, and I'm not even sure I know what I'm doing with my content someday.
Yes.
And then the ELD teacher feeling the same of, now I have to learn everybody else's content and figure out
and
how
be the expert in language.
And be everything to everybody. And so functional language planning really helps with that, but it really is helpful for you in getting started that you have a couple tools to begin the journey, because you can spend a lot of time, like I did, learning everything through trial and error in the hard way, or you can save a lot of time by starting with a much more focused approach. So the first thing I recommend and is that in a link that you're going to share with the audience is that we have a English language development standards alignment guide. It's a free download to get people started. So when you think about language, it's this huge, gigantic mass of things that you could pick from. It's like going to some huge buffet and
having all the options.
And you're overwhelmed by the options. And no matter which one you pick, you feel like you're missing out on something good on the other end of the buffet. And so the alignment guide is a great first step tool for everyone to say, in each grade level, what language do students need to be able to use to be successful in second grade? And then from there, you can differentiate. But first step, just like what are the big high impact language pieces that we should do first? Because there's so much you can do that they won't necessarily use, but what are the big things that I know they'll use right away and will serve them from here forward? And so that alignment guide gives you a much smaller menu of choices that will be high impact. So that's step one. And then we have other different planning tools and things and organizers that you can use. But thinking of planning, a lot of teachers know about backward design, beginning with the end in mind. The UDL has been around for a long time. So I think a lot of teachers are already doing that. Then the next step would be to lay that alignment guide on top of it and say, when we look at the assessment, we're looking for what are the most important things in this unit that students need to be able to speak to write to understand. And then looking at what kinds of questions are asked, what kinds of prompts are we giving in class. And then really the only additional step is to then say, what language do they need to be able to participate in that? So that's the one step. We're already doing the back mapping. Like, how are we going to get from here to there? Here's the background knowledge. Here's, the skills they need. And then thinking to yourself, I always tell teachers, if the principal walked in the room and you wanted them to be impressed by how wonderful you are as a teacher and you're conveying all of this knowledge, and the student you would call on, give the most eloquent, wonderful. So think about that student and think about what would that student say and what would that student write, and then look at it and say, what do all my students need to be able to do that? And then it starts to come to you, like maybe they need to know how to write sentences that compare and contrast. Maybe they need new ways to say, for sequencing instead of first,
Yeah.
next, then last. They need variety. They need new ways to do that. So what does your most eloquent student say, and what language do they use? And then let's work that in as we model,
Mm-hmm.
as we model in speaking in class. Like, we want to use that same language. We want to give them opportunities to practice with that language. The practice is the huge part. They'll do it. You could give beginning English proficient students a complex sentence frame to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
the comparing life from colonial times in England to in America. This is fresh in my mind because I've been planning with the school. And and they can do it,
Mm,
but they just need to hear you do it first,
yeah.
hear a few other people do it, and then they can follow that model and jump on. So
Mm-hmm.
just pause for a bit, provide that modeling and practice, and you'll just be amazed at the kinds of responses they come up with because they have the information.
Yeah.
It's just they're not sure where to start with sharing it with others. So if you add
Mm-hmm.
that step in with the modeling and like being really explicit about when you turn to your partner to, we're comparing two fractions, which one's greater? When you turn to your partner, I should hear what it should sound like. I should
Mm-hmm.
hear these words from our anchor chart or from our word wall. I
Yeah.
should hear things like, and then have your sentence frames, your sentence starters. Like, be really clear on what their
Mm-hmm.
conversation should sound like.
Mm.
And it doesn't take much time for them to adjust to that. If you say, this is what I want, and then you go around and give feedback on that. I like the way you use the frame. I like how you're using that math vocabulary. Could you say that again using, such and such? It just little cues will make a
Mm-hmm.
huge difference. And that's
Mm.
something that our content teachers can do all day.
Yeah,
And our
absolutely.
ELD teachers can help you with the levels, and that I consider like part 2 advanced down the road. You don't need to know how to differentiate and level everything to get started.
I love that.
Just modeling and opportunity
Yes.
and just being aware.
Yep.
Just being aware will make a huge difference.
I love this. This just hits and resonates like here is the solution because it doesn't matter what content class is being taught or what curriculum is being used, but to be able to overlay this. And I love that of, that backwards design of just really and setting that clear, where are we wanting the students to go with their language? What is it that we're reaching for? And now how do we get our students there? I think there's so much in teaching that we just get very lost and lose sight of where we're going,
Right.
with individual units, with different lessons, and that confusion. I mean, that's what I have found is just having that very clear structure, that explicit instruction with our ELLs is something that helps them to just feel safe, to feel excited, to feel confident because they're clear of what's expected and they rise to that. Like you're saying, when you say clearly, this is what I want to hear when you're speaking with your neighbor, they love that because then they know what's expected of them. And I think often we just get so many things going on in one lesson that, they kind
Right.
of get overwhelmed. We get overwhelmed, we lose sight. And so I love just the real simplicity and intentionality of
Mhm.
what you're sharing with us today that can really impact all language levels.
The one thing that I usually say at some point when I meet with a grade level team or a teacher or a school, at some point in the conversation, I always say, you are making this much bigger and more difficult than it needs to be, right?
Yes.
It's really kind of simple, and you
Mhm.
can do so much with a few little things. And
Yes.
and I think that's the empowerment that teachers are missing, is that you don't have to have a master's degree in linguistics to be a
Yeah.
language teacher, right? We need people with different levels of expertise, but to get it started and get it going, just some daily practices will
Mm.
make so much difference. like you said, a student who wants to be part of the group, but they just aren't able to put those words together yet.
Yeah.
There's no, just giving them that little start, a model first, repeat this person, now make it yours. We do that all the time. The I do, we do, you do. So same thing with language.
Yep.
And success breeds success, right? They do that. They got a good response. People understood them. They're like, okay, I can do this. Next time they're more brave, right? And the next time they're more brave, and they'll start taking chances, and because they know you're going to give them the little clues they need to get going.
Absolutely. I love that so much. Kelly, I could keep talking to you about this all day, but we're running out of time. So before we head out, I would love for you to share with my listeners where they can find more about you. I know you have a functional language planning course that's starting, or a cohort. So please share more.
Absolutely. So English Learner Portal, you can go to the website. There's lots of resources and things you can find there. We do webinars pretty regularly on different topics. More recently, really focused on functional language planning, because I feel so strongly that it's just a little tiny missing piece that would make everybody's lives so much easier. But we do other topics too. And so lots of webinars you can join in from the website. You can join the mailing list and find out about whatever opportunities are going on, depending on where you live. Sometimes there are live workshops nearby, or we go out to districts. For the functional language planning in particular, we have two different programs, I guess. Our functional language planning expert intensive, that's step one. That's giving all teachers, ELD content, district leaders, whoever wants to wrap their mind around what this looks like in a school, and take you step by step through some of the background in SFL and functional language, and then moving to the practical, and then a dip into the research and back to the practical, trying to balance that so you have a really solid foundation. And our groups leave feeling much more empowered to advocate for what they know is right to do, which has been a missing piece.
Absolutely.
And for anybody who wants to get those basics down, we go through the alignment guides, how to backward map, and within that program, the piece I love the most, I love all of it because it's very interactive, but what I love the most is each individual person has individual coaching sessions with me via Zoom, or, if you happen to be in the right place, sometimes we're not in person, but we just get to talk about how it applies to you, Beth, today in your classroom. And we work through individual applications, and then we always come back as a cohort and share. And you get so many moments with people across the country who are doing the same thing. So our next cohort begins June 2nd. So now's the time to check it out and jump in. I'll share the link with you where they can learn more about the schedule and the program. Then our second phase of that, we had so much fun in the first cohort that everybody's like, okay, what's next? When I start doing this and trying it, I want people to be there for me.
Yes.
I want
so much you learn just by, implementing, that you need that continued support.
And so after I go try this a little while, I want to come back and talk about it more. So after you take the expert intensive or participate in that program, then we do have ongoing support in what we call functional language planning masterclass. Where we get down into the nitty gritty of like, okay, so if I know this week is a great time to teach how to, expanding noun groups, right? Then how do I do that? Like, what does that look like? And we get down into the nitty gritty in the masterclass, and we spend more time coaching, more time group problem solving, sharing ideas, things like that. So that one's still learning, but a lot more collaboration in the second part. And that one kicks off in the fall, but we really want you to take the expert intensive first, so that you can try some things out before we really dig in.
What a what a powerful asset you are to teachers who sign up for this. I mean, to have you coaching them and looking at, their lessons and
Well,
seeing
thank
how they
you.
can, that's really incredible. So we will put
It,
all those links in the show notes along with the free, I'm blanking on what it was called.
the alignment guide.
The
Yes.
alignment guide. I was going to say the
Mhm.
scaffolding guide, but
But
yes, the alignment
definitely
guide.
take
That sounds,
advantage of that to get you
yeah,
started.
absolutely.
And I love it. And I love that I have switched, that we have switched to this approach, because seeing the moments as you're working
Mm,
with teachers and they're like, I have been doing this. I just didn't
yeah.
know I was doing it, and I didn't know that I should do more of it.
Yes. And isn't that so true? When you're working with multilingual learners, especially content teachers, it's really encouraging them that a lot of what they're doing is great. Maybe they tweak it a little bit this way or that way, but overall, there's things that they're already doing that's not adding on all these other things and having to learn a
Mhm.
whole new curriculum. It's really just optimizing the time they have with their students to really bring that language piece out. So,
And
I love
to really streamline the planning. So the co-planning
Yes.
can go so much faster when you know, this is what I'm looking for, this
Yeah,
is where I'm looking, pick out a couple of things and go, right? It doesn't have to be
absolutely.
hours of planning. And we're our own worst critics. We are so hard on
So
ourselves
true.
as teachers. And I can guarantee you're already doing a lot of it. And then once you know which are the most powerful pieces, then you
Yes.
can narrow down what to do more of.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, we'll make sure to include that link as well so people can check it out, get started right away as they wait for the other classes to begin and check out
Yeah.
your webinars as well. So thank you so much, Kelly. You have just brought so much today to this podcast that I know everyone's going to come away feeling inspired and feeling like this is doable. They can do this and they're excited. So
Well,
thank
thank you
you.
for spreading the word and all the support you give as well.
Absolutely. It's all what it's all about, right? Collaborating to help do our small part to help our multilingual learners succeed. So, all right, Kelly. Well, hopefully we'll talk again soon. And thanks again.
Thank you.